Let me ask you something. What if the plants people relied on thousands of years ago are still some of the most powerful plants you can grow today? What if before modern systems, before packaged inputs, there were simple crops that did not just grow, they sustained life? Now think about that for a moment. No fertilizers in bags, no complex systems, no constant adjustments, and yet they grew food that fed families, communities, generations. Healthy soil, wealthy foods, health, strength, stability. I remember walking through a small garden. Nothing flashy, no heavy inputs, but something felt different. The plants looked strong, the soil looked alive, the system looked stable. And when I asked what they were growing, the answer surprised me. These are the same kinds of plants people have grown for generations, even in biblical times. Now that changed the way I saw things, because these were not just crops. They were tested, through time, through different conditions, through seasons of plenty and seasons of lack, and they kept producing. Now let me ask you, have you ever wondered why some plants seem to struggle, while others just keep going? Drop that in the comments. Because what you are about to see is not just about ancient plants, it is about why some crops still outperform everything else today. And the first thing you begin to notice about these biblical plants is that they do not depend on perfect conditions. They were not grown in controlled environments. They were not fed constantly. They were not adjusted every step of the way. They were grown in real soil, under real pressure, and yet they produced. Now that tells you something important, because a plant that only grows when everything is perfect is not a strong plant. But a plant that can grow through changing conditions, that is a plant you can rely on. Healthy soil, wealthy foods, health, strength, stability. Now let us look at a few of these. Grains like wheat, staples that have fed people for generations. Not flashy, not fast, but dependable. They grow in a range of soils. They store well. They provide real sustenance. Then you have crops like lentils and beans. Simple plants, but powerful. They do not just feed you. They help build the soil, fixing nitrogen, supporting microbial life, creating a system that gives back. And then there are figs, olives, grapes, plants that do not just grow once, but continue producing over time, season after season. Now let me ask you, if you had to choose, would you grow something that looks good for a moment, or something that feeds you again and again? Because that is the difference these plants represent. Now here is where it gets even more interesting, because it is not just what these plants produce, it is how they interact with the soil that makes them so powerful. And this is where everything begins to come together, because these biblical plants do not just grow in soil, they work with it. Now most people choose plants based on speed, appearance, quick harvest, what looks good in the moment. But these plants were chosen differently. They were chosen for partnership, healthy soil, wealthy foods, health, strength, stability. Now think about something like beans again. They do not just take nutrients, they contribute. They fix nitrogen into the soil, feeding the system beneath the surface. Or take something like olive trees, deep-rooted, stable, reaching into the soil in ways shallow crops never can. They do not just grow, they anchor the system. And then there are grains like wheat, covering the soil, protecting it, holding structure together over time. Now put that together. One plant feeds the soil, another stabilizes it, another protects it. And what you get is not just a garden, but a system that supports itself. Now let me give you that picture again. One grower fills their space with fast-growing crops. Quick results, but constant maintenance. The soil needs more input, more correction, more support. Now the second grower builds with intention. They plant crops that work together, that support the soil, not just use it. And over time, something powerful happens. The soil becomes stronger, more balanced, more productive. Now let me ask you, are your plants working with your soil, or just taking from it? Because that answer determines whether your garden becomes easier or harder over time. Now here is where it goes even deeper, because these plants do not just grow well, they feed you differently. And this is where most people begin to see the real difference. Because these biblical plants do not just grow in difficult conditions, they feed you in a way that actually sustains you. Now think about it. Many modern garden crops give you something, but not much that lasts. A quick harvest, a light meal, something fresh, but gone in days. But these plants were chosen differently. They are chosen to carry people through seasons. Healthy soil, wealthy foods, health, strength, stability. Take grains like wheat again. Simple, but powerful. They can be stored. They can be turned into many forms of food. They provide real energy. Or lentils and beans. Small but full of nutrition. They store well. They feed families over time. They do not just add to a meal. They are the meal. And then there are figs, olives, grapes. Not just fresh food, but food that can be preserved, extended, used again and again. Now let me ask you, is your garden giving you snacks, or is it giving you stability? Because that is the difference. Now let me give you that picture one more time. One grower fills their garden with crops that look productive, but at the end of the week, there is not much left. The second grower plants with purpose. They grow food that stores, food that feeds deeply, food that reduces dependence on the outside. And over time, something changes. The garden begins to support life, not just activity. Now here is the part most people miss. These plants were not just chosen for convenience. They were chosen for survival, strength, and sustainability. And that is exactly what makes them powerful today. Now we are coming into the final part of this, because once you understand what these plants offer, you begin to see how to build something that actually lasts. And this is where everything begins to shift. Because once you understand why these plants were chosen, you stop asking, what grows fast? And you start asking, what sustains life? Now that question changes everything. Healthy soil, wealthy foods, health, strength, stability. Because when you plant with that mindset, your garden stops being random. It becomes intentional. You begin to choose crops that feed your soil, feed your family, feed your future. Now picture those two people again. The first person fills their garden with whatever is popular, whatever grows quickly, whatever looks good, and every season, they stay busy, but nothing really changes. Now the second person builds differently. They look at what has worked through time. They choose crops that are proven, that grow in real conditions, that produce consistently, that store and sustain, and over time, their garden begins to feel different, more stable, more reliable, more productive. And that is when the real shift happens. Because now, they are not just growing food, they are building something they can depend on. Now let me ask you, if your goal is strength, why would you build your garden on weak choices? Because once you see that clearly, everything begins to change. Now we are coming into the final part of this, because understanding these plants is powerful, but applying that understanding is what creates real abundance. And this is where it all comes together. Because now you are not just looking at ancient plants, you are looking at a way of building your garden that actually works, not just for a season, but for the long term. Healthy soil, wealthy foods, health, strength, stability. Now let us bring it back one last time. Two people, same land, same sunlight, same opportunity. The first person builds their garden on what is popular, fast crops, quick wins, constant change, and every season, they stay active, but they stay dependent, still buying most of their food, still adjusting, still searching. Now the second person builds with understanding. They choose plants that have stood the test of time, plants that grow in real conditions, plants that work with the soil, plants that produce food that actually sustains. And over time, something powerful begins to happen. Their soil becomes stronger. Their harvest becomes more reliable. Their dependence begins to decrease. That is when the garden becomes something more, not just a place to grow, but a source of strength, stability, and provision. Now let me ask you one final question. The next time you plant, will you choose what is popular, or what actually provides? Because the truth is, the soil beneath your feet is capable of producing far more than you think, but only if you plant with purpose. And when you combine strong soil with the right plants, you do not just grow food, you grow security, confidence, and a future you can rely on. Because when knowledge meets living soil, abundance appears. Remember, wealthy foods lead to health, strength, and peace of mind. Thank you for watching, and do not forget to subscribe for more practical wisdom and simple methods to help you grow abundance right where you are. Until next time, keep growing.